2 out of every 3 American workers can't cover a $1,000 emergency without borrowing money. Not during a recession, not during some once-in-a-generation collapse. Right now, in 2026, in a country that still calls itself the richest economy on earth. And that number matters because it immediately tells you this is not a story about people suddenly becoming lazy, careless, or bad with money. It's a story about what happens when an economy keeps posting strong headline numbers while the people living inside it feel poorer every single month. By the time we're done here, you're going to see how that extraction works, where the pressure is actually coming from, who benefits from it, and why for millions of people this no longer feels like a rough patch. It feels structural. There's a woman in Ohio who opens her banking app and sees $370 left. She works full-time. She hasn't been reckless. She hasn't been booking trips or buying expensive toys or living some fantasy life she can't afford. She's just standing there staring at a number that does not stretch to next Friday, trying to do math that refuses to cooperate. There's a guy in Texas who says it in the simplest possible way. I did everything they told me to do. I show up. I work hard. I pay my bills. So why does it feel like I'm going backward every month? That question is the real starting point, because when millions of people in different states, different industries, different age groups, and different income brackets all start asking the exact same question, you're no longer looking at personal failure. You're looking at a broken operating system. And the weird part is the public story still doesn't match the private reality. Politicians keep talking about growth. The market keeps making new highs. Unemployment still gets presented as proof that the machine is healthy. On paper, the economy keeps getting framed like a success story. But then regular people look at their checking accounts and see a completely different country. Money comes in. Money disappears. Rent, insurance, groceries, utilities, medical bills, car payments, childcare, subscriptions you can't even cancel because half of them are now tied to basic functioning. What's left at the end isn't relief. It's dread, not long-term planning, not confidence. Just the same question repeated every 30 days. Can I make this month work again? Most people still talk about this like it's inflation, and inflation is part of it. But inflation by itself doesn't explain the full experience. This also isn't a story about Americans suddenly forgetting how to budget. That explanation is way too lazy. What's actually happening is slower, more systematic, and much more dangerous because it's so easy to normalize. Value is being pulled out of ordinary lives in small legal increments so consistently that people start assuming this is just adulthood now. That this is what mature life feels like. That permanent low-grade financial panic is normal. But when you stop looking at the slogans and start looking at the numbers, the picture changes fast. Roughly 65% of American workers are living paycheck to paycheck. Not just people out of work. Not people on the margins of a labor force. People with jobs. People clocking in. People getting up early, commuting, producing, answering emails, dealing with customers, solving problems, keeping businesses alive. That's what makes this so important. Because the old social contract was simple. Work hard, stay responsible, and even if you don't get rich, you'll at least get stability. That was the promise. What the data shows now is something much harsher. Millions of workers are earning income that is already spoken for before they even touch it. They're not deciding how to allocate their paycheck. Their paycheck is arriving pre-claimed. Housing takes the first bite, and it's usually the deepest. Then whatever remains has to absorb food, transportation, insurance, utilities, internet, phone service, medical expenses, debt payments, children, unexpected repairs, and every other cost that used to be manageable but now feels like a recurring ambush. If things go unusually well, maybe there's a small amount left at the end. A few $100s if nothing breaks, nobody gets sick, and no bill comes in above expectation. Which means the margin between functioning and collapse is now frighteningly thin. For millions of households, missing 2 paychecks is not an inconvenience. It's an eviction risk, and that's what people often miss. This doesn't feel like one giant catastrophe. It feels like chronic pressure. That's why it's harder to resist. It's not one dramatic event that forces a national reckoning. It's 1,000 smaller increases spread across enough categories that by the time you notice how much changed, your old baseline is gone. Rent goes up a little. Insurance goes up a little. Groceries go up a little. Utilities go up a little. Then a year passes, then 2, then 4, and you realize that your life now requires far more money just to recreate the exact same standard of living you already had. Meanwhile, wages either stay flat or rise slower than the cost of maintaining ordinary life. You're running harder, but the treadmill is speeding up faster than you are. that creates a very specific kind of exhaustion. It's not just being broke. It's being disoriented. You do the responsible things. You skip luxuries. You cut back. You don't take the vacation. You brew the coffee at home. You tell yourself you'll wait on replacing things. You keep trying to behave your way out of structural pressure, and the pressure keeps winning anyway. That's when the self-doubt starts. Maybe it's me. Maybe I'm just bad at this. Maybe everybody else figured something out that I missed. But when tens of millions of people feel the same financial confusion at the same time, the right conclusion is not moral failure. The right conclusion is that the system is extracting more than it's returning. And the reason this works politically is because it doesn't always make people furious. It makes them tired. That's a huge difference. A system can survive a lot of anger. Sustained exhaustion is even more useful. Exhausted people don't organize. They don't challenge assumptions. They don't think in systems. They just try to survive the week, and that makes it much easier for the extraction to continue quietly. If you want to understand where that extraction starts in the most obvious way, start with the bill that hits first and hardest every single month. Housing. There was a time when housing represented stability. You worked, you paid rent or a mortgage, and the home itself was the platform from which the rest of life happened. It wasn't easy for everyone, but it was at least intelligible. Now housing has become the central stress engine in American life. In major cities, and even in places that used to be considered affordable, 50 to 60% of take-home pay can disappear just on rent or mortgage costs. That means before food, before transportation, before healthcare, before debt, before your child needs new shoes, more than half of your labor has already been spoken for. Put differently, many people are working over 2 full days every week just to preserve the right to sleep where they already sleep. The increase hasn't even bought people better lives. That's one of the most maddening parts. Apartments didn't suddenly become luxurious. Neighborhoods didn't become dramatically safer. Commutes didn't become shorter. You're just paying more for the same, or sometimes worse conditions. A one-bedroom in many areas now costs what a mortgage on a family home used to cost. And buying isn't the clean escape hatch people imagine either. Interest rates rose. Home prices stayed elevated. Property taxes climbed. Insurance climbed. Maintenance got more expensive. HOA fees kept accumulating. What used to be sold as the stable long-term path now often feels like a leveraged bet that can go wrong in 5 different ways at once. What changed? Housing stopped being treated primarily as shelter and started being treated as a financial instrument. Once that shift happens, the incentives change completely. Private equity, institutional investors, large funds, and speculative capital don't need a home. They need yield. They need appreciation. They need somewhere to park money and extract steady returns. The result is brutal but predictable. People who need somewhere to live end up competing against systems whose only purpose is to maximize profit from the same asset. Shelter and capital appreciation are not the same goal. When they collide, human stability usually loses, and once housing consumes that much income, it starts dictating everything else in life.